everyone, I had a request to do a video on sewing in your tags on the inside of your bag. I use two different types of tags. I have the colored version, which is printed on vinyl, and I have also got cork tags. So I'm going to demonstrate both of those for you today. You will need a ruler, you will need double-sided tape, and then you will need thread, preferably thread that matches the color of your tag. So I have gray for the tag with the gray outline, and then this brown color for my cork tags. So let's get going. Take your cut lining piece, and the first thing you're going to do is put a strip of double-sided tape in the middle of the back of your tag. Make sure too at this point that your interfacing is applied to your material if you need it, and you're working with your lining piece in this instance. So it doesn't have stabilizer, but it is otherwise ready to go. I'm going to do one of these at a time. When I place my tag, the first thing I like to do is have a look at my lining piece and see where the actual edge of the bag is. This is the Betty pouch, so it doesn't have corners on the bottom that are going to take away from the height of the pattern piece. So this is the finished height of the bag. The seam allowance is the same on the top and the bottom. So I just want to place it in the middle of my lining piece, and I like to place it just above halfway down. So using my cutting mat here to guide me and my ruler, I'm going to have a look and see approximately where I want that to be, really just eyeballing it. So that looks good, which is about 1.5 inches down. So then I take my ruler and I'm going to measure in. Now the sides here are tapered. So I'm going to center my piece between the grid on the cutting mat, and then use the edge of the grid as opposed to the edge of my pattern piece to center that up, because it'll be easier to go from those straight sides there. So this is 9 inches across. So the center of this section that I'm working from, which is not the size of my pattern piece, it's just this 9-inch segment of my cutting mat, is 4.5. So that's going to give me the center of my pattern piece. And you can check that the measurement is the same at either end just to make sure that it's correct. I'll slide that a tiny bit over. And then using my ruler, I'm going to center my tag up with the center of this pattern piece. So the center is right here, and I've got the same distance on either side. Keeping the ruler in place, I'm going to take off that double-sided tape. Make sure that it's not going to be my stitch line. And then I'm going to line that up again, putting the top edge of my tag flush with that ruler, and then just press that down using the double-sided tape to keep that in place. And then that will be ready to sew on. I'm going to do the other tag while we're here, the same way, centering up the top on my mat with any random part of the grid. So mine is centered up between these lines here at the top and here at the bottom. Now with this one, we will be taking corners. So the effectively the bottom of the bag is here because this will form the base. So it's going to be, it's about 4.5 inches down. So it's going to be about the same. So I eyeball it, decide where I want that to go. 1.5 inches looks good for this one as well. But you can choose to have your tag higher or lower. You want to be careful that you're not doing it too low because it's going to end up in the base of your bag. So if you have these cutouts here, just make sure that you're not going too far down and you're not going so high that it's going to be a problem with your seam allowance. So I probably wouldn't go higher up than 1.5 inches. I usually do 1.5 inches or 2 inches from the top. So again, measuring down 1.5 inches and centering between two lines on my cutting mat. So I'm using this line here and this line here, and this is my center point. Check it first to see how it looks. It looks good. Measurements are the same. Keeping the ruler in place, peel off the double-sided tape, and then just hold that in place and put the tag flush with the ruler and press it down. And then these are both ready now to be sewn on. So let's head over to the sewing machine. I have sewn on a lot of these tags at this point, so I know which stitch length and which stitch width I use to get an almost perfect rectangle around my tag. What I suggest doing is some experimenting with a piece of vinyl, a piece of scrap vinyl that is the same size as your tag, to work out which stitch length works best for your tags. I don't use a top stitching stitch length for my tags. I prefer something that is somewhere between a construction stitch length and a top stitching stitch length. And I also don't go 1/8 of an inch in. I prefer to go about 1/16 of an inch in. So I know what the settings are that I like for my particular tag, so I can just turn to those settings whenever I'm sewing on my tag. And I position my needle, and then using the edge of the presser foot, as you know I do, I'm just going to hand crank that needle and manually position the corner to get the first stitch in place. I'm using orange thread, even though normally I would use a gray thread with this tag so that it blends in with the vinyl. I'm using the orange so that you can see it. And then I'm not going to back stitch. I'm just going to do the first stitch, and then I'm going to sew along this edge. And when I come close to this corner, I am not going to keep going. I'm going to slow down so I can see if my stitch is going to hit in the right spot or if I need to hand crank it to get it right. And then raise the presser foot and have a look. And you can see here that this stitch is just a little shy of where I would want it to be in this corner. So I'm going to manually stitch that last stitch so I can get the needle to hit right here. So turning it back, lower the presser foot, raise the needle, and if I were to let it go all the way down on its own, it would go too far. So I'm just going to raise the presser foot and just draw the fabric back towards me, lower that needle again, check that it's hitting in the right spot, drop the needle, raise the presser foot again, and check that I'm happy, and that looks good. Turn with the needle down, and then keep going straight down the edge the same way, slowing again when we get to that corner. Okay, and then you can see that that stitch is in a much better position for going along the bottom. And we continue along. The needle is down, and just on the way back up, we can keep going and it won't skip that corner stitch. And turn it again, and you can see that it is right. And this is what I was talking about with knowing for my particular tag size and on my machine, the correct stitch length for hitting almost perfectly in every corner. Before we continue down this side, the other thing that I'm going to do is pull this top thread to the back. So lifting up my lining, just pulling that thread through, and then I'll continue down this side. And then to do the last stitch, just checking, and then I'm going to manually sew the last stitch into that corner to get it to meet back up with where we started. And then pull that up, and if there's a tiny gap, you can use the machine to go into that first hole, or you can use a needle to join that up. One hand crank, and then pull those threads to the back again. And you can see that it has met back up with where we started. You've got a pretty even stitch all the way around your tag. Then what I do is knot that, and then I trim the threads. And that one is complete. So I'll show you on the other tag. Something else to consider when you are doing these tags is your tension. You want to make sure that your tension is correct so that you don't see any of the bobbin thread. Another thing you can do is make sure that your bobbin thread and your top thread match. You can start in the bottom corner if you're concerned about that first and last stitch. Position your needle, Position your presser foot just in from the edge. And then we're going to lower that presser foot and lowering it so that the first stitch starts about a 1/16 of an inch from the short edge of the tag, and then sewing down this side using that medium stitch length and sewing 1/16 of an inch from the long edge of the tag. Again, not back stitching, slowing down as we get to that corner. Check the position. If you're happy with it, continue on. Always turning with the needle down. If you're unhappy with where the needle has hit in that corner, manually reposition it. And if here, for example, the stitch has gone too far, drop your presser foot, hand crank the machine backwards to just raise that needle, and then slide it into position and lower it back down in the correct spot. Pull the thread through to the back, continue down that side, slowing down as you get to that corner, and then for the last stitch or stitch and a half, manually positioning those stitches using the wheel to get it right where you want it to meet back up with the first stitch. And then take it off the machine without back stitching, pull the threads through, and then you have completed it. If when you pull your threads through to the back, you find that you have not completed the last stitch and so there is a gap there, what you can do is just take a hand sewing needle and just manually sew that last stitch there to complete the rectangle. And then tie it off as normal and trim your threads. And that is how I attach my vinyl and cork tags to my bag linings. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.